続きまして、中国人民大学国際関係学院教授、時殷弘先生にご講演いただきます。
Thank you very much. Respectful Governor and Vice Governor and distinguished guests, it's my great pleasure and honor to be here to participate in this very significant forum. And I would like to talk about today China's new leadership and the prospects for China's foreign policy and China-US relationship. And China now have new leadership. China's new leaders will need to shape China's foreign policy in a very different context to that of their predecessors. While China's national power is much stronger than it was, the international environment is both more complicated and less beneficial to countries' goals. The new leaders have to contend with two internal tensions that are affecting the creation and implementation of foreign policy. First of all, the leadership needs to balance China's different strategic goals, especially those that are military and economic in nature, against the country's diplomatic interests. Secondly, and even more importantly, it has increasingly become the case the national strategic requirements are at odds with domestic international constraints. As usual, the prospects of China's foreign policy are uncertain. As of yet, there is no grand strategy that can provide answers to the fundamental questions facing Chinese policymakers. How can China deal with tensions that have resulted from increased national strength, rising popular nationalism, and other complex domestic forces? What should China's response to the military and geostrategic rivalry with the United States look like? How can China respond to territorial and maritime disputes with its Asian neighbors? Is there a way to make China's giant acceptable to its neighbors, both strategically and diplomatically? How can the further aggravation of China as a military threat ceases and the corresponding arms race be prevented in the context of a dramatic buildup of power projection capabilities of China's military? Over the long term, considering the vigorous expansion of China's overseas economic presence, how can China avoid so-called forced imperialism resulting from protection of legitimate interests, but persuaded through arms and coercion? And how can China's leaders simultaneously contribute to global governance as well as to China's domestic governance? And how will China deal with the so-called E-world, NGOs world, and the various other issues of soft power? There is also a more immediate issue to tackle: the nature of operational mode, for managing intensive and protracted confrontation, particularly in the planned situation with Japan, with the potential to escalate into military conflict. How can China exact its new preference for so-called pushing vigorously toward the bottom line while managing the risk of increased military conflict and the weakening of China's influence in its periphery that Xi Jinping himself referred to? China faces a dilemma between managing its sphere of operation and its broader strategic preferences. So now we turn to some tentative prediction of China's foreign policy direction. In attempt to predict where China's foreign policy is headed, there are two major reference points that should be considered. The first of all, and most significantly, in the foreign policy section of his report to 18th Party Congress, then Secretary General Hu Jintao reflected on China's sense of its national strategic requirements. Over the long term, in highlighting the often repeated principle of peaceful development. A less important, but more immediately relevant reference point is the current emphasis on maritime power, sovereign rights, and sustained joint military buildup, which, while partially reflecting domestic pressures, including militant opinions from public and armed forces, is also a response to U.S. pivot to Asia and East and South China Sea disputes. If the strategic outlook, which former Secretary General Hu put forward, prevails, then the U.S.-China rivalry will be mitigated and well controlled. But if domestic and international pressures prevail, then we can expect increasing tense bilateral relationship between the two powers, that is China and the United States. The strategic outlook that Hu Jintao outlined could be regarded as a soft fist to be used against hard fist of U.S. strategic pivot and the military preponderance. The intention would be that, over time, the hard fist would be softened as a result of this asymmetrical interaction between the soft and hard. If China were to instead deploy a hard fist, this thesis would suggest that the outcome would instead be a mutual hardening, making conflict inevitable. However, the problem is that the opposite thesis, the China's hard fist cord, in due course, pressed back against the United States, or forced the United States to become softer if the U.S. bottom line was not too seriously challenging, is also a plausible and, at the moment, a more popular line of thinking in China. The experiences of the last few years suggests the formal prospect is not very likely, as do the main developments since the 18th Party Congress and later. One can refer to, first, President Xi Jinping's repeated use of the theme, the great resurgence of Chinese nation, referred to more officially as China's dream. Second, a shift in the driving aim of People's Liberation Army from effort to just build up a modernized force to the simpler but more comprehensive and more forceful aim of being capable of fighting and fighting victoriously. Third, extraordinarily frequent official reports of breakthroughs in China's advanced weaponry, military technology, and increasing capability of PLA's combat readiness, mainly in a few months around the 18th Party Congress, and in context of extraordinarily intensive confrontation with Japan. Fourth, the further hardening of China's posture toward territory and maritime disputes with Japan and with some neighboring countries in South Asia. Fifth, the remarkable decline, especially in the months before President Xi's bore-out speech in early April this year in Hainan Island, in the number of references to principle of peaceful development that used to guide Chinese foreign policy and declared so frequently by Chinese government in the previous years. Of course, I have to point out, in the most recent months, government increased remarkably the reference to peaceful development again. Taking a low profile, another traditional principle in contemporary Chinese foreign policy is no longer referred to. So I will turn to next point on a so-called new China-US great power relationship. If China's peaceful rise continues for a sufficient prolonged period, the United States may come to consider China's economic, diplomatic, and even strategic rules much more seriously. The United States may even eventually adopt a peaceful final settlement, in my words, with China. This would require an understanding of different balances of strengths and influences that each side has in various functional and geographical areas, as well as the adoption of rationale of selective preponderance or advantage distribution of comprehensive superiority. This means not only accepting a leading position that China could obtaining in terms of GDP, volume of foreign trade, and economic diplomacy influencing Asia, but also accepting the idea of mutual strategic deterrence between China and the United States, regulated by arms control mechanisms and conflict-building agreements. Mutual strategic deterrence between China and the United States may include Chinese and American military parity, or even a marginal Chinese superiority in China's official area, with waters adjacent to Taiwan's east coastline as the approximate demarcation line, and a peaceful, or basically peaceful, reunification of two sides of Taiwan Strait, as well as in a narrow but still substantial span of the Western Pacific. The American system of alliance in North Asia would need to become less military-centric and less targeted on China. Meanwhile, the United States, with China's acceptance, would retain overall military superiority, in particular in the central and western part of Western Pacific, including Okinawa and Guam. The United States would also be assured that China would always exclude war as an instrument in solving major disputes with neighboring countries if our neighboring countries could assume the same, thereby guarantee Americans' vital interests in the fundamental peace of Asia-Pacific region and the security of its allies. Meanwhile, the United States would remain the predominant diplomatic actor in some regions, while China would exert influence in some others. The distribution of formal influence between these two powers in global financial and security institutions would roughly correspond to their objective strengths and contributions made in related functional areas. As a result, China's contribution in international affairs will have to increase proportionally to China's increased strength. All of this would necessitate power sharing and close consultation between Beijing and Washington. It would also require, first, that the United States accept a peaceful and constructive China as a world power. Second, that China respect the vital interests and legitimate international concerns of the United States as another world power, perhaps still the #1 world power in prior future. This is what I define as peaceful final settlement between two great powers, China and the United States. But of course, there will be also another alternative, an ominous alternative. In light of the present situation, the more ominous alternative is, unfortunately, the more likely one. Why? Look at the structural rivalry between China and the United States is becoming more comprehensive, profound, and pronounced. On one hand, China's continuing dramatic military buildup, especially in strategic power projection through oceans, air, and even outer space, is becoming an increasingly prominent concern of American strategists and even American public. On the other hand, the US pivot to Asia, its diplomatic gains in East and Southeast Asia, its military revolution driven by the diminishing financial resources and desire for fewer combat casualties, and the increasing perception of China as a threat have put Beijing at odds with the United States. These increasing tensions, along with the rising possibility of the armed conflict with American strategic partners in Asia, has in turn further spurred China's military buildup. Since the Reagan administration, the United States has been resolved in its maintenance of unquestionable military superiority, perceiving this superiority to be the most significant strategic asset of a superpower. At the same time, China has resolved to modernize its military for the sake of what China believes to be its vital national interests, for its self-respect, and also because of the wishes of the overwhelming majority of its people. This dissonance is surely not absent of possibility of future paralysis in Sino-US relations. If it's only to prevent this ominous outcome, the two great powers, China and the United States, across the Pacific, should do much more and much better in future years. Whether they can do much good, much better, and much more in future, I frankly speaking, I still don't know. The prospect is uncertain. But one thing is certain. The consequences of this relationship will have its enormous impacts upon every country in this region. Thank you very much.